Welcome to this third and last class on anatomy. This is going to be a monster of a class and we have a lot of stuff to cover. So in the previous classes so far, we've seen the head and we've seen the torso of the human body. So what's left essentially is going to be the different the limbs, so the arms and the legs, and of course the hands and the feet. So we have all of this to check out and a ton of stuff to learn. I highly recommend that you grab a sketchbook and that you try to follow along, or if not follow along, try to sketch along the way, because this is going to be, like I said, a monster of a class and we are going to be covering a lot of stuff. The arms and the legs, the hands and the feet are no easy part of the human body to draw, and they are quite complex, but I think that with everything that I am going to show you, with all the different tricks and tips and different construction methods that I've developed over the years, I think you'll be able to, after this class, have a much easier time when it comes to drawing the anatomy, and as a result you should also have a lot more fun. So this is one of my favorite topics. I cannot wait to get started, so let's jump right into it. Alright, we begin again here with our trusted friend, the anatomy model. So there's a couple things here before we get into the muscles of all those different limbs that I want to touch upon. So this is going to be kind of the structure of a basic muscle. So it's quite important, and that's something we haven't really talked about in the anatomy class thus far. So, and it's going to be really quick. So basically, a muscle is always, you'll have kind of like the muscle fibers in the center. This is going to be the tissue that will grow if you exercise this, if you strain it, and this is going to be kind of the volume that really influences the surface of the body, the silhouette of the body. But every muscle, when they attach to the bones, they are connected to tendons. So at the extremities of each muscle, there's going to be the tendons. So tendons here, you can see that's like the white portion of the muscle, because it doesn't have any blood going into it, or at least very, very little, if any, which changes its color compared to the muscle, which are really, really blood hungry. So tendons are going to be kind of like the portion of the muscles that attach onto the bone. There's also ligaments that you've probably heard of before, and ligaments are going to be essentially again, tissue that attaches instead bones to bones, right? So this, for example, here between the femur and the hip bones, those are going to be ligaments, and the ligaments are just there basically to keep everything in place, to prevent things from moving too much. So if we look at the other arm right here, you can see here around the wrist, there's a large band of ligaments. Those are all there. And all these smaller ones here also are all there to keep the skeleton together from falling apart. So this is the structures for the bone, but when it comes to muscles attaching to bones instead of bones attaching to other bones, this is going to be done with the tendons. So again, the tendons don't grow. The muscles, the muscle fibers between the two tendons, between the two extremities, is going to be really what gains in volume. So with that said, we are going to take a look at the upper arm section of the body. So this is going to be comprised of 3 different muscles. And we are going to start from the front here with one that most people are probably familiar with, and this is going to be the biceps brachii. So the biceps takes its name from the fact that it has 2 different heads, so biceps, and those 2 heads are going to be the short head, which is funny because it's the one that actually looks the longest, but this is going to be the head that is closest to your torso, and then you'll have the long head, the one on the outside. So those 2 heads are pretty much indistinguishable for most people, so you won't usually be able to tell the difference or to tell the split between the heads, but they do exist, and they have very different different purposes. So the short head here is going to be attached onto the scapula. So this little tip of the scapula here. So the tendon of the short head is going to attach there, and then the long head, on the other hand, the one on the outside, is also going to attach onto the scapula, but at a different spot, and actually goes, like the tendon for that head actually goes over the humerus and onto the scapula. And then they are both going to be joined at the bottom here to that tendon right there, and that tendon is going to be attached onto this bone right here, which is the radius. So the one of the two bones that is on the outside, so closest to your thumb. So this is for the bicep. So the bicep, obviously, this is a flexor muscle. This is going to allow you to flex your arm, essentially, so to rotate that shoulder joint, and not that shoulder joint, that elbow joint. So if you raise your hand forward, or if you're trying to grab something, any kind of lifting motion where you go from a relaxed position where your arm is bent, this is going to be the one muscle that is the most active in that action, and those two heads combined. Now, we can also see that the biceps here slides right underneath the pectoralis major, which is right here, before it attaches onto the scapula. So something to keep in mind, the pectoralis major is always over it. And then of course we have the deltoids, which is going to be all the different heads on top of all of this. Now, moving on to the one muscle that is sandwiched in between the biceps and the triceps, which we are going to take a look at shortly, but this one right here is called the brachialis. So the brachialis is going to be a muscle that is often confused with the biceps. So in most cases, at least for most people, unless you're flexing and unless you're really, really lean, so you have a really low body fat, the difference between the two is going to be quite hard to tell for most people when the skin on top of it. But this is a distinct muscle, and it attaches at very different places, and it's going to be one that is seen on both sides. So you'll have kind of like the brachialis showing up on the outside and on the inside here as well. This muscle is very similar to the biceps. It has, at least in its function, so it's a flexor, another flexor muscle that has for a purpose to bend your elbow joints. And we can also take a look at another one right here, which is this is not the brachialis, this is the coracobrachialis, which is a little bit hard to say, coracobrachialis. And this is going to be one that is normally not seen. This is going to be only visible if you raise your hand and you're flexing, like in this example. So the only reason why I'm including this one right here is because it's in the same spot as the brachialis, in the sense that it's sandwiched between the biceps and the triceps. And it almost looks like it's the same muscle, but it's not, right? It almost looks like it's the brachialis that's covered in part by the triceps here, which is why we can't see it, but not really. It starts at a very different spots. So, the coracobrachialis starts right where the brachialis ends, so right about in the center of the humerus, and then attaches onto the almost at the same spot as the short head for the biceps, so right here at the tip of the scapula. And then, so if we look at the attachment points for the brachialis, and as you can see here, the brachialis is actually quite big. So, if you develop your biceps quite a lot, this is going to give a lot of volume to your upper arm section. Now, the brachialis attaches exactly like I said, where the coracobrachialis ends or attaches onto. So it'll start from here as well, so towards the center of the humerus, and it'll attach directly onto the bone. So again, it's the tendon and then the muscle, and then it's going to end right onto the ulna. So this one right here, this bone right here, the bone for your elbow, this is where the brachialis is going to attach onto. And then finally, on the back right here, we have the triceps brachii. So the triceps takes its name because it has 3 different heads, so as opposed to the biceps, and it's going to be this entire section right here. So the triceps will start with the medial head. So we have the medial head right here, which is hidden by most of the other ones. but it's going to really give a lot of volume to the arm because it's actually a pretty big head. It's just hidden by the other ones. Then we have the smallest of the heads, which is this one here, the lateral head, and the long head on the inside. So let's start with the medial head. The medial head here is going to be only visible, like I said, only be visible from the side here, and it'll kind of just push that tendon here, that tricep tendon back, you know, as it grows, because it's laying right underneath it. And then we have the two main heads of the triceps, and those are going to attach onto that big tendon here that attaches itself onto the ulna, or your right on your elbow right here. And those two heads, so at the bottom, they kind of merge together into this one big tendon. And again, you know, where the tendon is, like we've seen before, there's not going to be much growth there. So the muscle is not going to grow. The tendons don't grow, really. It's going to be the muscle. So as you can see here, there's really like a nice white spot here where there's not going to be any muscle growth, and instead it's going to happen all around it, kind of like a horseshoe shape. So this is a distinct shape for the tricep. It has a very, especially here, this one head, the lateral head, which has a very distinct silhouette, or a distinct impact on the silhouette of the body. And this one head is going to attach at the top here towards the top of the humerus, and it's going to slide right underneath the deltoid. That's going to cover the attachment point here. Same with the long head, except this long head doesn't attach onto the humerus, it attaches onto the scapula. So we've seen that the biceps is a flexor muscle, so it helps to flex your arm and rotate your elbow joint. The triceps is going to act as the opposite of that. It's going to be an extensor muscle. So its purpose is going to extend the arm. So flex with the biceps, extend with the triceps. So you can imagine, you know, if you're trying to push something down, so you're going from a bent position, trying to push something down, trying to lift yourself up from on a table or from outside of a pool or something like that. You know, you start with your arms bent initially, and then as you push up, trying to extend your arm, this is going to be in part possible thanks to your triceps. So there you go. This is going to wrap up kind of the muscles for the upper arm section. It's quite simple. So all the muscles that we've seen here are all visible. So there's not much. There's not going to be anything that's hidden underneath, and that's going to be in contrast with kind of the other limbs, where there's going to be a lot of deep muscles that are not going to be visible to the naked eye. But in this case, you know, for the upper arm section here, almost all of these muscles, actually all of these muscles, are going to be very visible through the skin for most people. But now that we've seen what the anatomy is like, let's take a look at how to actually draw these. All right, so we're back in here in our Photoshop file, and we're going to keep on adding onto this the skeleton until we are done. So previously we've been working on the torso, so that's what we have so far. And now we're going to move on to the arms, so the upper arm section. And so the way this is going to work, in comparison at least to the torso that we've seen previously, is that most of the muscles for the limbs are going to be a little bit more easily simplified. So most of those muscles are going to be ellipses of different length and different thickness. So that's in contrast with the torso, where we remember, you know, we had kind of all kinds of different shapes for the different muscles in here. So, you know, for example, the abdominal group in comparison to the latissimus dorsi, very different muscles, very different silhouettes. But when it comes to the biceps, the triceps, the brachialis, they can all be simplified into ellipses. So this is what we're going to be working with for the rest of the limbs, mostly, for the most part at least. And we've already gone in that direction a little bit, but what we're going to do with the rest of the limbs is that they are all going to be separated into compartments of muscle. So for the upper arm, it's a little bit different because there's not really any compartment. So the compartment that would be in the front is just the bicep. It's a more simple portion of the limbs. So we have essentially 3 different muscles, right, that we've just taken a look at. So the biceps, the brachialis, and the triceps. But for the forearm, for example, or for the upper leg section, the lower leg section, those are going to be all subdivided into compartments. Very similar again. So 3 compartments for each portion, for each section. But those compartments are, instead of being a single muscle, they're actually going to be a group of different muscles. But this is all to simplify our task when it comes to drawing them. So again, each of those compartments are going to be simplified by a single ellipse. All right, so now this is not going to apply for this case because a compartment equals a muscle. So instead of simplifying a compartment as an ellipse, we're going to simplify a single muscle as an ellipse, but it's the same idea. So I'm going to switch to different colors, something like this. So basically, like I've said, every muscle is going to be in an ellipse, right? So when it's stretched, when it's not flexed, when it's extended, relaxed, the muscle is going to be narrower, it's going to be longer, and when it's flexing, it's going to turn into more of a ball. The volume is going to remain the same, so we have the same volume here as we have here. So that's another thing that we have to keep in mind when we draw different positions where muscles are flexed or not. But basically, this is going to be kind of the behavior of a typical limb muscle, right? So they're going to either be relaxed, so a longer ellipse, or flexing, and that is going to be closer to a sphere. So we have 2 examples here that we are going to start with. So for the 3 muscles that we've seen, it's going to be 3 different ellipses. So what I need to figure out here is where to place them on the actual skeleton. So we'll start by adding the shoulder. So the shoulder, in this case, I'm going to go with ellipses as well because it actually works quite well from that angle. So 2 different ellipses, 3 different ellipses. So it would be something like this. And I want to be clear here. These are overlapping, right? They're not right next to another. This one right here is in front, it's higher, and those 2 in the back here are kind of behind the main one. So if it was transparent, we could kind of see these other portions here. So this is what we are going to be dealing with here. So different ellipses, depending on the angle, they're going to either be one next to another, or they're going to be on top of another. Now, just to make sure that the concept is clear, we're going to do it with a very, very simple example here. So we're going to start with 2 ellipses that are relaxed, right? So this is the relaxed state. So the ellipses, essentially, they can be either relaxed, like they are right now, they can be stretched, or they can be flexing. Whenever the arm or the limb is just straight, when there's no flexion happening, when there's no activity in the muscle, the different muscle groups or the different muscles are going to be in a relaxed position. So in this case, it's going to be like this. But now, what happens if we introduce a flex in the arm? So this is what's going to happen. So this ellipse right here, where it was relaxed before, now it's being stretched a little bit more because it has to travel a longer distance to wrap around the elbow. So in this case, we are going to move from a relaxed position to a more stretched position. So the muscle is going to take this shape instead. And that's going to be the opposite for the bicep, where the bicep usually had to reach down here. Now it doesn't have to reach as much because the arm is raised a little bit. So the bicep is going to be flexing. It's going to be in a flexing position. And the result is going to be that it's going to change and transform towards more of a ball. So of course, right now, this example, it's really exaggerated. So, the difference would be a little bit more subtle than that. But this is just to kind of give a good idea. So actually, let me make that a little bit more accurate. So something like this. All right. So if we bend the arm, this muscle here is flexing while this muscle here is stretching to accommodate the change in angle right here. So this is something that you can apply to every scenario. So whenever you see a bend right here in the limb, you can imagine that the muscles that are on the outside here, they are going to be more stretched than the ones that are inside, flexing to rotate that joint. So there we go. So now let's take a look at what those muscle groups are going to look like, or what those muscles are going to look like on the arm that we have right here. So we are going to start with in this case, we can kind of see here, this is kind of like the back, and we have the elbow right here. So if we're able to see kind of the back of the cylinder for the humerus, and you can also look at the cylinder that we use for the joint, right? So it's kind of the angle of it. It means that the arm is kind of pointing away from the camera, very similar to the illustration that we have in the bottom left corner. So this is going to give us a better view of the tricep right here. So we can start by placing that. Then behind that, sandwiched in between the bicep and the tricep, is going to be the brachialis. The brachialis is going to go a little bit lower, like this. And we have the bicep here, which is going to be in front, and as a result, slightly is going to appear to be behind the brachialis from this perspective. And it will be about the same size, maybe a little bit shorter. So the brachialis is going to actually go a little bit lower than the bicep. And in this case, especially since the bicep is flexed a little bit more, right? So those would be kind of like the main groups that we have. So let me clean that up. So there we go. So we would have those 3 ellipses. And now it's just a matter of kind of cleaning things up and applying a little bit more of the anatomy that we've just seen. We know that the bicep here goes back in and attaches onto the clavicle by going over the top of the humerus. And then at the bottom here, again, it's going to go down and attach here in the front, right? So something like this. And then we have the tricep in the back. So the tricep, I've only drawn it as a single ellipse, but maybe seen from a different angle, we could have kind of like a split to indicate the different heads. But in this case, I'm just going to, again, soften those lines a little bit and kind of connect the dots so to finish up the silhouette. So the tricep is going to go down all the way down to the elbow in almost a single line. And we remember here that this portion here going to the elbow, this is the tendon for the tricep. So from this angle, we would probably see it a little bit. So something like that. Starting at the bottom, the lower half portion of the tricep ellipse, and going all the way down to the elbow joint, right? So something like this. And then, well, all we have to do is kind of clean this up a little bit, and then we would have our arm, right? So now if we do exactly the same exercise, but adjust kind of like the shape of the ellipses to accommodate for the bend. So, the more bent the limb is, the more bent the joint is, the rounder the ellipse is going to be. And so you would have something like this instead. As we see here, the biceps ellipse would be quite round, while the triceps ellipse would be longer compared to their more relaxed state. So now that we have kind of like the main shapes in there, which is already looking pretty good, right? But it's not quite accurate. We can definitely go in there and add a little bit more details. So we know that, especially for the triceps, we know that there's 3 clear, or at least 2 very visible heads that we need to worry about, because those are going to actually be quite visible on the arm. So what we can do to finish this off pretty much is to try to get those details in here and try to get back those heads for the triceps. So what I'm going to do is I am going to separate this and kind of go with their attachment points, right? So we know that the short head here of the tricep kind of goes around like this and then up onto the top of the humerus. And then the long head on the inside in comparison is going to kind of go underneath the deltoid and attach at the top of the scapula. So a little bit different. So for the same, for this curve here that we continue it according to the tendon. So the tendon attaches at a different spot, meaning that the curve here is going to be different for both. So this one's going to curve in a little bit sooner, go attach here at the top. This one's going to curve a little bit later. And of course, we have kind of like the skin here doing kind of joining the two different shapes, 2 different ellipses for the deltoid and the triceps. But this head here would go kind of like something like this instead and attach onto the scapula. And we can do the same thing towards the bottom here. So we know that the outside here is correct, but actually keeps going down a little bit more towards the elbow, and then kind of just ends up merging with the tendon of the tricep. So something like this. So now we would have kind of like a good shape and would be ready to shade. And the reason why I really like to use ellipses for this is that it actually introduces the proper shading without you having to really think about it much. And by that, I mean this. So without thinking about anything else, we can just go ahead and shade those simple ellipses. This is something that we should be able to do at this point. And we should already, by just doing that, have a pretty good base shading for this portion of the arm. And now, of course, I've just shaded those spheres as individual, and not those spheres, those ellipses as individual ellipses, but like we've just seen for the tricep here, I would need to maybe subdivide that one ellipse into maybe smaller ones, smaller sections. So like split it in half, but I already have kind of like those shapes here. So what if I consider, this portion here an ellipse? Well, I can just go ahead and adjust the shading for that. So I can just start adding a little bit of shadow on that side here to make everything rounder. And of course, this goes a little bit lower here. So I'm going to adjust that. All right, so super simple. We're just adjusting kind of what we have already and just introducing a little bit more volume information. But there we go. And then for the tendon here, the tendon will be mostly flat because there's not going to be much curve in here. The tendon itself is nothing like an ellipse. It's more like a straight band. So the shading is going to be a lot more simpler here. So maybe we'll have a little bit more shading towards the bottom here. And there we go. So it'd be something like this. Of course, this is super simple, and this is not a course about shading the body parts, but it's definitely something that we should start thinking about. And by using ellipses like this and using simple shapes in general, it makes things a lot simpler. Now let's move on to the actual skeleton here that we've been working with. So those ellipses here, instead of being from the side and slightly more towards the back, at least this view here, that's what it is. Well, in this case now is going to be clearly from the front. So the ordering, how we layer the different ellipses on top of another is going to definitely change, depending on the point of view of the camera. That seems obvious. And so whereas these spheres here, we had kind of like the tricep, not sphere, these ellipses here where we had the tricep ellipse be the one in the front with the other two kind of layered behind. If we look at the arm from the side view, perfect side view, well, instead we would have kind of like the tricep ellipse, we would have the brachialis ellipse, and we would have the biceps ellipse, right? So they would be one next to another when we look at them from the side, because they're pretty much layered on a single plane. So this means that from the front view here, we see kind of like the top of the hamburger, the top of the sandwich. And so we are going to start with the ones that are further back first. So whenever we draw a muscle in here, when we draw an ellipse, we're going to start off with the ellipse representing the muscle group or the muscle that is the furthest back from the camera. And we are the camera as the viewer, right? So what this is going to look like here is, well, I can hide the deltoid, and so we can see kind of a better glance at the humerus. And I'm going to start with the tricep. So the tricep is the one that's going to be further back, and it's going to be behind this humerus bone. So it's going to start off somewhere like around here maybe. So like we've seen, from this angle here, the sphere is lays a little bit higher than the other two. So we're going to start a little bit higher, closer to the joint. And so it'll be something like this. And then the brachialis starts right at the halfway point here where the deltoid ends. So let's see where it ends. So we're right about here. There we go. So the brachialis is going to start right there. And I'm going to draw that ellipse again. And it's going to be something like that. And finally, we'll have the biceps. So now I can start to show the deltoid a little bit more, because the bicep is going to land in front of the deltoid, so somewhere around here. And it's going to start a little bit higher again. Then the brachialis, maybe something like this. So this is super rough, and I'm going to add colors now so that it's a little bit more clear what we're looking at. Okay, so now this is what we have, right? So now they're all layered on top of another from this point of view, and actually it looks like it's kind of working. They're in the right spot, And so now we can finish off the silhouette for those and kind of add in the tendons. So the top here, the short head for the tricep is going to end right behind here. So behind the humerus bone. So, you know, we can continue the shape, the line right up there, and maybe fill in the rest of the shape with the same color. We'll do the same thing with the bicep. So the bicep actually goes higher than this, slides right underneath the pectoralis major right there, and behind again, and attaches on top here back onto the scapula. We can't really see it from this angle, but that's where it goes. So that's one head, and then the other head kind of does the same thing, but is a little bit more direct. So there you go. We have kind of like both heads doing their thing. And then for the bicep here in the front, where it's going to end, in the back, we're not going to really worry about where the lower tendon attaches onto, because we can't see it from this angle. Then the bicep in the front here attaches, the two heads go down into a tendon and attach onto the radius, right here. And the brachialis attaches onto a little bit higher on the ulna instead. So we'll have kind of like that shape, like this. So now we have the proper shape of the muscle back in here, and we're pretty much done with this group here. So let me split that in half. So the one closer to the thumb is the radius, the other one is the ulna, and yeah, things are starting to look pretty good now. So let's show the deltoid again to see if everything works out. And there we go. So the deltoid actually would go behind the bicep. So like this, we can erase kind of part of it, the part that goes behind the bicep, which is the bicep is in front, if we remember, right? So we have the bicep right here. And if we're looking at it from this point of view, well, this portion here, this shape seems like it's on top of this shape behind. So we'll see this first. This is going to seem like it's hidden, this part here, by the bicep itself. So there we go. We would have a shape like that. All right, and there we have it. So we can add a little bit more white here towards the bottom to represent the tendons properly, but there we go. So from this point of view, this is kind of what it would look like. So in this case, you know, maybe we can push the bicep in a little bit more, so make it a little bit longer, reach a little bit higher here. So maybe something more like that. So that actually slides underneath the pectoralis major. So of course, you know, the initial ellipses are just there to quickly put things in place, and after that you can definitely kind of go look at it a little bit more and refine if needed. But then there we go. So those would be kind of like the muscles of the upper arm from this point of view from the front. Now let's move on to the 3/4 view here. So pretty much the opposite of this one that we've done before. So in this case, we're going to see the bicep a little bit more, and the other two are going to be kind of layered on the back. So we're going to start again with the tricep, because it's going to be the one that's farther back from this point of view. So once again, let's hide the deltoid. So we'll have the tricep kind of do something like that here. So we have the tricep here, the tricep sphere ellipse. We have the brachialis, and then we have the bicep sphere, which is going to be the same here. Maybe starts a little bit higher than the brachialis. So there we go. The ellipses here look pretty good. So very similar to what we just did, except we're looking at it kind of slightly sideways a little bit more. So now we can start adding in the tendons. And, you know, for this particular mannequin, his arm is, facing his leg. His palm is facing his leg. So as you can see here, what we're seeing is the outside actually. So we're looking at part of the elbow. And this means that the bicep here is going to have to kind of twist and then go in the front here. So we're not going to be able to see kind of where it attaches onto the radius, because it's going to be on the opposite side, hidden by the actual radius. So we'll go something like this. Then we'll have brachialis. It does the same thing, kind of wraps around and then attach onto the ulna on the other side. So we won't be able to see that properly. And then we have the tricep in the back here that maybe we actually get to see a little bit more from this point of view. And then the tricep is going to go down and attach onto the elbow like this by the means of the triceps tendon. And at the top here, on the back of the top of the humerus, And then here, you know, the bicep will go up here, but we're not going to be able to see that because parts of the pectoralis major is hiding it, and then we'll have the deltoid on top hiding everything as so. And then, yeah, so there we go. So now we don't have kind of like the rest of the muscles yet, but we'll get to that part later. So now I can just finish off those shapes properly and add a little bit of extra shading for the tendons. All right, so there we go. So that would be it for this point of view, this angle. Now we can draw the other one here. So this one is going to be not too challenging. It's actually going to be very similar to this one right there, because you know we can see here that the elbow is going to be in the back because the palm is facing us, right? What we can start with again is going to be the triceps, which is going to be in the back. Then we'll have, starting towards the center here, the ellipse for the brachialis, goes a little bit lower. And then finally the bicep, which is going to be in front of everything in this case, and also in front of this portion here. All right, and then we can finish that off by drawing the outside and adding in the tendons. The bicep here is going to rotate. We can kind of see the joint here for this this arm. So it's going to go kind of underneath the bicep and over like this, meaning that, you know, from this point of view, we're not going to be really able to see it, but it'll be something like that. So if I erase this portion here, you know, that'd be pretty accurate. And again, the bicep is going to appear to be in front of the deltoid, just like in this example here, where the attachment of the deltoid is going to be slightly behind the bicep. And so the brachialis, on the other hand, we see it poking on the inside here a little bit. And we can draw the attachment point for this one. So the attachment point is going to be right here on the ulna, on the inside, and the bicep is going to be on the outside here, a little bit higher, closer to the hand on the radius. And from this point of view, we're actually going to be able to see the coracobrachialis, which is going to be this this other part that looks kind of like the brachialis poke out here. So right, the same thing as this here, but start closer, a little bit higher on the arm, and kind of end right inside of the armpit. So in this case, you know, it's actually going to slide behind the pectoralis major, which is right here, and it's going to give us kind of like this shape right there. So we'll have, again, the bicep going like this, the coracobrachialis going like that, the tricep here, brachialis on the inside, on the outside, the bicep, and there we go. And then I forgot the tendon for the tricep, which would go down here. Now, before I move on to the back view here, I'm just going to refine, because from this view we're actually going to see something that we haven't seen yet, and it's going to be kind of like the third head for the triceps. So in this case, we'll have kind of like this big chunk here. So this is going to be kind of like the part of the long head, and then we'll have the medial head that's going to show up right here. So it goes here, and then we'll have this separation here. So the medial head is going to poke its head just a little bit here, in between the brachialis and the long head of the tricep. So the brachialis, let me make that a little bit more obvious. So brachialis here in darker pink, and then in dark red we have the triceps. So medial head right here, and long head down there, closer to the armpit. All right, so moving on to the back view. So with the back view, the one that's going to be further back, further away from us, is going to be the biceps, right? So the bicep is going to go, I'm going to hide this again. So the bicep is going to start right about here, go down there. So be something like that. Maybe a little bit more narrower. And then in front of the biceps, from this angle, we're going to have the brachialis that starts a little bit lower and finishes a little bit lower as well. And then we'll have the bicep kind of hide everything. So let me start to use the color. So we'll have this color here for the biceps, this darker color for the brachialis, And then the tricep itself is going to be pretty much over all of that. So we'll be covering pretty much everything. So we have, it starts a little bit higher here, like we know. And because it has 3 different heads, there's going to be a lot more volume towards the back here. As a result, it's going to hide most of the other 2 muscles. And there we go. So that would be kind of like the sphere for the tricep, right? So this right there. And so the bicep would be pretty much gone from this point of view. So now we can start to refine this a little bit more. So what we're going to do is finish off kind of like the connection for this. So the short head here goes and attaches onto the humerus. And this is the short head like this. And then it goes towards the elbow, which is right here. And then on the inside here, we'll have the medial head for the tricep, which is not super visible from most angle, but from the back, you will definitely be able to see it. It's going to be this bump right here. Kind of behind, or at least seemingly behind the tendon of the tricep. And then the long head for the tricep here definitely bulges out a little bit more. Now, the long head is a little bit particular. So if we look at it from the other side here, because we can see all those different muscles here, and it's actually going to interact with that. So we have the long head on the inside. It's actually going to go in front of the teres major, which is this one right here, like we've seen before, and it's going to slide underneath, right underneath the teres minor, which is the one on top, and then ends up attaching onto the kind of like the tip of the scapula, right around here. So we're not going to be able to see that attachment point, but the result is this: the long head for the tricep. We have the medial head here, and we have the short head on the outside here. So those will be kind of the different ellipses for the triceps. If we were to divide it a little bit further to understand kind of the different volumes a little bit better. What I'm going to do with this is I can actually make that a little bit bigger to make it work, and then it's going to go on top of this muscle here and then disappear behind, right? So it's going to be disappearing behind teres minor. That's as high as it goes. That's as high as we'll ever be able to see it. And there we go. So that would be the tricep from the back. So now we can adjust the shading maybe a little bit here. So on the outside here, we see kind of like the brachialis, but because of the small head, the short head of the tricep, it's actually going to be on top of it for the most part. So we'll definitely not see the brachialis from this point of view. So we can actually just erase that and maybe just make the tricep a little bit bigger. And yeah, that feels a little bit more accurate already. So there we go. So we have kind of like the shape going towards the joint here at the top on the shoulder. All right, and now it's when we show the deltoid, it gets a little bit messy. So we're going to erase a couple things here, but essentially the deltoid just kind of wraps around all of that on top of it for the most part. All right, just needed to adjust a couple things here. So this looks a lot better now. The tendon was taking a little bit too much space, but now it looks pretty good. So there we go. So from the back, this is really how you would illustrate and you would draw the tricep. So here, this connection here, this gets really tricky if you don't know your anatomy properly, and this is something that you'll see people make a lot of mistakes with. And knowing that it has to go over first over the latissimus dorsi, right? And then over the teres major, but then under the teres minor. And so there we go. So this is how we would do the arm. So a good takeaway from this is that from the back view, if you're looking at a character straight from the back with arms kind of like in this position, you're likely not going to see much of the biceps or the brachialis because the triceps is such a big muscle that it will likely hide most of them behind it. And then for that same reason, when you look at the arms from the front, you will also get to see part of the tricep because it's wider than the other two. And as a result, the other two won't be able to fully cover it regardless of the angle. And so there we have it. Now let's move on to the next chapter where we're going to talk about the forearm. The next group of muscle is going to be the forearm. So the muscles of the forearm. Just like that with the upper arm, is going to be split in 3 different groups of muscles, and those 3 groups are going to be essentially the extensor muscles, so all of these, and those are called extensor because they extend the fingers when the fingers are flexed. So as you can see here, all these muscles have their tendons end on the top of your hand and none on the palm, while you'll have also the flexor muscles. So all of these right here, those are going to be all the flexor muscles, and they are going to, well, help flex your fingers. So this is going to be all the different muscles that end up on the palm of your hand instead. And so those 2 big groups of muscles, as you can see here, they form about pretty much each half of your forearm. And then we also have an extra group here, which is going to be called, well, in this case, this is going to be just one muscle, and this is going to be called the brachioradialis. And with the brachioradialis, I'm going to actually add this extensor muscle as well, because the 2 of them usually make up one single volume for the most part. So those 2 are going to grow significantly, but they always grow kind of together in the sense of how it's represented when you draw it, how the volumes look. It's a lot more easy to categorize it the same way as the brachioradialis. So this is what we're going to do. So we'll have 3 different groups. So this one right here, brachioradialis, this is going to be the group that kind of blends the upper portion of the arm and the forearm. So like we've seen, the brachioradialis here attaches onto the humerus towards the bottom and slides right in between the tricep and the brachialis. And then at the very end, right here, it ends on the tip of the radius. So hence its name, brachioradialis. And then the other one right here, so the one that forms a pair with this one, the extensor, this one is called the extensor carpi radialis longus. So it's a mouthful, which is why, don't worry about the names too much. Let's just consider this the brachioradialis group. And then this one here starts at a very similar location, so just slightly lower on the humerus, and then it ends on the second metacarpal. The next group that we're going to take a look at is going to be the one where the one responsible for extending your fingers. So all the extensor muscles minus this one right here. So the 4 big ones that we'll actually be worried about here, not worried about, but that we're going to actually look at are going to be those 4 ones right here. So there's a bunch more muscles, as you can see here, that are not highlighted. So all these smaller ones that we're not going to take a look at because they are deep muscles, or they're not actually going to be visible at all, or not much for a normal person. So the ones that are going to be really visible are going to be those 3 right there. So the thin one in the center, not in the center, but the thin one, this one right here, which is called the extender digiti minimi. This one is going to be most of the time just sandwiched in between and will act almost like as a deep muscle. So those are going to be superficial, so visible to the naked eye, especially if you flex. So you'll have normally those 3 chunks that originate from your elbow. So those are going to be most visible. This one quite rarely, but it's important to know. So you have this big chunk here, kind of linking the upper arm and the lower arm, the forearm, and then right next to that, right kind of in the hole here, in between the brachioradialis group and the elbow, you'll have those 3 big muscles. So a lot of people, when they draw those, they just simplify them as one shape. So you can definitely do that. But some people do have those quite visible. So like climbers and things, and people like that, where they have really strong forearms, those are going to actually develop and be quite noticeable. But if we look at them individually, so it's like we've seen, it's 4 muscles really when it comes to the extensors. So the ones that we really need to pay attention to. So the first one here is going to be called the extensor carpi radialis brevis. So all the names are really complicated for these smaller muscles. So again, you don't really need to know the names, doesn't really matter. But I'm just just for the sake of sharing the information. This one here, the bigger one, the one that manages kind of all the four main fingers, this one is going to be called the extensor digitorum. And then we have the smaller one here that is most of the time not visible, only ends on the pinky. This one's going to be called the extensor digiti minimi. And then we have the last one of the extensors on the side here, which is going to be called the extensor carpi ulnaris. So, you know, you don't really need to know where they end up on the hand, because most of the time, at least actually all the time, those are not going to be visible. So as you can see here towards the hand or around the wrist, they're all down to tendons only. So there's not going to be any volume here that can grow. Nothing is going to actually get buffer if you work out your wrist. The muscles will, so your forearm is going to get bigger, but these are never going to change. So you're born with, you know, the way you're born is essentially how it's going to be your entire life. So for that reason, we don't really need to know where they end, because they're not going to really affect any of the surface or any of the silhouette. But these here, these four ones definitely will. So all the extensors. And then we have another tiny muscle here. It's called the anconeus. This one is really, really subtle. It's a really small muscle, really not that visible when it comes to drawing it. So we can skip over that one. But yeah, just know that there is something, you know, starting from your elbow, kind of in between the two groups of extensors and flexor muscles. So now if we move on to the last of the groups, so all the flexor muscles, so all of these right here, those are going to start kind of on the other side of the arm. So as you can see here, they all attach pretty much onto the lower portion of the humerus, you know, at the top here. So all these extensor muscles all attach at the same spot here on the outer portion of the humerus end. And then we have all the flexors that attach on the inside, so closer to your torso. And then all those muscles here that we can see that attach on the inside, they're all going to land and they're all going to end on your palm. So you can see this this twist happening here. So this starts here on the side and then they end kind of on your palm. So they have to twist around the ulna and the radius to land here. And the same thing with the extensor. They also start on the outside here, but they land right on the top of the hand. So when the hand is in this position right here, they all twist. These muscles are going to be most of the time drawn as a single shape, but let's take a look at all of them. So this one right here on the inside is going to be called the pronator teres, and then we have right next to it the flexor carpi radialis. Next to that, a smaller muscle, the palmaris longus. Then this big one right here that impacts a lot of the volume of your forearm is going to be called the flexor digitorum superficialis, another mouthful. And then finally, it's going to be called the flexor carpi ulnaris. So that's pretty much it when it comes to the muscles, the important muscles of the forearm. Like you see here, you know, there's a bunch of other ones here kind of hidden inside. You know, the hand is a very, very complex kind of organ, not organ, but a really complex part of the body. And so it requires a lot of different muscles, because the movements of your fingers are very, very precise, they're very delicate. You can do a lot of things with your fingers, move them in a lot of different positions, a lot of different angles. So it requires a lot of things to be able to control this, as opposed to something like your joint here, your elbow joint, where it's a lot more simple, right? You're only rotating on one plane, so it can only rotate up or down, and that's pretty much it. But when it comes to your fingers, you know, if you look at your thumb, for example, the thumb can move in a bunch of different directions, which is why it has all these muscles, these small muscles, to allow it to do that. But we're not talking about the hands right now. We're talking about the forearm. So now that we've seen kind of the anatomy of the forearm and all the different groups of muscles, so the flexors, the extensors, and the brachioradialis group, let's take a look at how to draw the forearm. So we're back in here in a Photoshop file, and then when it comes to drawing the muscles of the forearm, the different compartments of the forearm, this is going to be a little bit, it's going to be easier in some ways and more challenging in other ways. And let me explain that. So when it comes to the forearm, it's not really a portion of the body that you really pay attention to throughout your life. So it's definitely not as present in everybody's eyesight as the triceps and the biceps. You know, those muscles are bigger chunks, they're bigger volumes. People really point them out often. You know, this is something that you'll see that your eye is going to be looking at for a very long period of time throughout your entire life, at least in comparison to your forearms. So the forearms, on the other hand, they look more like just regular cylinders. So for most people, there's not going to be much definition there. And the different muscles that are part of the forearm are not going to be as easily identifiable. And so for that reason, it makes the forearm more of a mystery for a lot of people. That's going to be kind of like the challenging part. And also the fact that it kind of rotates. So, you know, depending on how your hand is oriented, the different muscles, the radius and the ulna are either going to be parallel or they're going to be, you know, crossed. So this is going to impact kind of how the muscles are drawn, of course, and it's going to add another layer of complexity. But on the other hand, the forearm in general is not going to bend ever, so you're definitely not going to get a lot of different changes in the ellipses that we're going to draw for the different compartments of the forearm. So it's going to be simpler in that sense. Now, when it comes to drawing the ellipses, we're going to do that first on this view right here. So it's going to be a little bit easier to represent or to explain kind of where the different ellipses are positioned. So let's go ahead and start from the ellipse that is further back, and this is going to be the one for the all the flexor muscles, or no, excuse me, all the extensor muscles or the posterior group. So this is going to be the one on the outside here. So this group is going to start kind of towards the back. So the start of it is going to be somewhere behind here. So we're not going to be able to see the top of the ellipse, but it should be something like this, and it goes about 3/4 of the way down towards the wrist, which is right here. So that's our first ellipse, and those ellipses are going to be a little bit narrower because they're not those groups of muscles are not going to have as much mass as the upper section of the arm. And now we're going to do the same thing here for the anterior group, which is going to be all the flexor muscles of the forearm. And this time it's going to start kind of on the inside towards the front, so right about here. And then that ellipse is going to be almost parallel to the other one, but not quite. So all the ellipses that I'm drawing for the forearm, they all have kind of like this convergent point, which is this one right here. All the ellipses are kind of pointing towards that, right? So, and it's going to be the same thing for this one right here, which is going to be in front of the other one, about the same size. So something like this. Again, making sure that those are thin, that those ellipses are narrow enough. There we go. So about the same size. And then now we need to draw the one that is going to be representing the brachioradialis group. And that one's going to start right about the halfway point of the brachialis muscle. So this one right here, the one we can see here on the side. And it's going to start right about here, like I said. And it's going to go down kind of like towards the side again, pointing towards the wrist. But this one, at least from this point of view, is going to be mostly covering the anterior group, the posterior group, which is this group right here. So we'll have this ellipse like this, go something like that, again pointing towards the center. And this one's going to be a little bit longer, a little bit narrower. So you can see here it's pretty much covering the posterior group ellipse, and now we're left with something like this. All right, much better. So now let's move on to the tendons. So we're going to finish off those shape and kind of sculpt them a little bit better, because of course, no muscles really look like this. And so starting with the one that we can actually see, so we're going to ignore this one back here for now. We're going to start off with the anterior group. The way we placed the ellipse here, we're not going to really be able to see the different tendons here because they kind of attach right at the tip here. But what we can see that the result of that is going to be kind of like an interesting silhouette, right? So we have kind of like the bicep goes in like this, and then we'll have to poke out to reach to accommodate kind of this bone here poking out and with all those muscles attached to it. So there we go. And then towards the bottom here, as we know, all those different muscles, all those flexor muscles are going to go and land right at the center of the wrist here. They're going to then be distributed in all the different fingers, right? So something like this. So we can draw the tendon as like this, going towards the center of the wrist as such. Now moving on to the brachioradialis group, this one is going to just kind of fade right about here and then end on the side here of the radius. So you can kind of just blend that like that. This arm, this wrist is really wide now, so let's bring this in a little bit more. So from the front, this would be it really. The last thing that we need to see here, which is going to be the top portion of the brachioradialis group, and that's going to slide right in between the brachialis and the tricep. So I can erase this much here and in front of the tricep, but from this point here we can't really see can't really see that, but there we go. So that would be pretty much, you know, the correct shapes for those two compartments. And of course we still have one in the back that we can't really see now, but I'm going to move on to the side view here where we'll be able to look at those ellipses a little bit better. So we're going to do the same thing. So starting, actually we're only going to do one of them because, you know, as we've seen, the flexing here in the arm doesn't really impact how those muscles are going to show. So moving on to the ellipses of the forearm from this angle. So there's one thing that I need to fix before I move on, and that's going to be kind of the angle of the simplified head or tip of the humerus here. So the angle is a little bit off. So what's important to do in this case, you know, when you have the biceps and everything kind of like drawn, to make sure that your bones are in the right position. And I did, you know, this skeleton really quickly at the beginning, but yeah, it's a little bit incorrect. So when you have kind of like the bicep, let's say this is the bicep, and then it's split right down the middle, so we're like facing it head on. The tip of the humerus should be like this. It should be like, you know, a cylinder, but seen from the front. So now that we know that the bicep is not quite seen from the side either, where the cylinder on the other hand would be seen from the side view like this, you know, would see kind of like its circular side if the bicep was seen from the side view, but it's not quite that. So it's kind of an in-between of that. So instead, the biceps here is kind of this long sphere, and then the side of the sphere is something like this here, and it's angled, tilted kind of towards the top very slightly. So if I'm to draw kind of the ellipses around it, it would be something like this. You know, so that would represent the mass or the volume of the bicep pretty well. And what we can essentially deduct from that is that, well, if we continue that line here on the other side where we can't see, and let's do the same thing for this one right here. Well, now what I can do is kind of trace, you know, a point from here to here, and this is going to give me kind of like the parallel that I need to work with when it comes to the angle of the cylinder here for the joints, for the humerus. So I can have something like this now. All right, so as long as I respect kind of this perspective, I should be fine for the most part. So I'm going to try to draw that again here. So we'll have kind of like the side of the cylinder closer to us, which represents the side of the humerus closer to us. So that'll be a little bit more accurate, and then I'll be able to draw kind of like the different bone for the forearm based off of that. So it's not really necessary, but it really helps to figure out kind of like the twist that's going on in the forearm, because most of the time the forearm is going to be in the twist position, meaning that the two bones for the forearm are not going to be parallel, so they're not going to be like this. You'll have kind of like the radius like this and the ulna like this, more like the ulna. Yeah, it's very rare that they're going to be parallel. So in this position, for example, well, what we had is that we have the humerus like this, so kind of like the socket for them all, and then we have the radius that starts kind of on the side that goes towards the center, towards the wrist, and then we'll have the ulna that starts in the back instead, so behind the humerus, creates the the elbow, and then it comes onto the side here. So even though they look like they're parallel, this one's actually a little bit further back and then comes towards the front. So they're parallel from that angle, but if we look at them from the side view instead, it would be kind of like you have the radius like this, and then you have the ulna starting towards the back and then converging into the same spot, right? So from the side view, it would be like this. From the front, they look parallel. So anyways, all of this to say that those two bones are a little bit complicated to figure out, but it's really important that we do when we are to draw them and to draw the muscles that are kind of around them, attached to them. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to erase this, and we're going to draw the different bones for the forearm. So I know that my ulna is this thing right here, this big bump, kind of like biting, the top part biting onto that cylinder, and that this bone is also going to be the one that lands right onto the side of the pinky on my arm. So if I have like the palm of my hand kind of like this, right? Well, the ulna would land right about there, and then the radius would start here on the side, on the edge of that that cylinder, and would land on the side of the thumb on the other hand. So right about there. So from this angle, I still get kind of a slight twist, right? So if we clean this up, it'll be a little bit more visible. So the bones, well, they would look something like this. So the radius right here, the ulna in the back here. Now the tendons for the triceps, they land right onto the tip of the ulna right there. So that's correct. And so that's going to probably hide most of the other part, the other side, kind of like the inner portion of the end of the humerus. And so we're not going to be able to see that too much. But now we're able to draw those ellipses a little bit more accurately. So forgive the detour, but it's really important to understand kind of how these two bones work. And when you're not too sure of the perspective, draw the bones individually. We know what they look like now. We know how kind of like they're oriented, where they attach onto. So it shouldn't be too hard after you do that a couple of times. And so now let's draw those ellipses. So I know that the first ellipse is going to start on the inside here of the humerus, on the inside edge. So I'll have kind of like the tip of the sphere kind of going like this, and then it goes right about 3/4 points, 3/4 of the way before it reaches kind of the end of the bone, right? So this is the end of the ulna. So we have the ulna, it ends right here. And so there's one, and then the other one will start here onto the other side of the cylinder. So we'll have another one like this. And so that ellipse would be, of course, the one for the posterior group for all the extensor muscles of the forearm. And then finally, we need to add the brachioradialis group. So this group here in the back, the anterior group for the flexor muscles is going to be pretty much hidden behind the bones. We're not going to be able to see that too much, if at all. So when it comes to the brachioradialis, so it's going to be still, a shape like this. So like we've seen, kind of an elongated ellipse, but what happens is that we're going to place it right here, so it ends right on top of the posterior group, somewhere towards the center of the forearm, right about here. So we have the tip here, it's right about there in the center. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to just break that ellipse, rotate it, and place it in position. So that break is actually important. So it's really going to break right here, and then this is going to be kind of like the fold of your arm. But this is how this brachioradialis group is going to actually deform when it bends, right? So it'll be kind of like a broken ellipse, just like that. And then what we can do here is clean this up and add a little bit of shading so that we can get a pretty good idea of the shading for all these compartments, all these groups of muscles for the forearm. All right, so done really quickly. I mean, it looks something like this. Like we've seen, it's a really, really good indication already of what the proper shading should be like. And now all we have to do is kind of clean this up and subdivide it properly where it needs to be subdivided. So let's
actually insert the brachioradialis first into its proper position, right? So it should slide right in between the triceps and the brachialis, right at the halfway point of the brachialis. So right about here, and then slides right in, just like, and then towards the bottom here, it should cover, you know, most of the side of the humerus here, so the edge of the humerus. So if it doesn't go low enough, you know, you can always extend it a little bit so that it covers it properly. And then, well, at the tip here, we know that, you know, it's kind of split in half. You know, it's two muscles, so we can indicate that by suggesting kind of like a split right here. And then we can add a little bit more mass here. So, you know, that concave part here is really where the arm is going to bend. So try to figure out, you know, if the arm bends, you know, if this goes up like this, where is the bend going to happen? Is it going to be like this? Is it going to be along this line, or is it going to be along that line? It looks like it's going to be about right here. For the rest, you know, this thing here is going to end up in a tendon and go to the side here of the thumb, attached onto the side of the radius. And then we'll have next these posterior group here. All those tendons are going to land right on top of the hand. So they're going to have to kind of like twist a little bit. So go like this and then twist and land on top of the hand. Now, you know, this big chunk here is, like we've seen, it's three parts, right? The extensor digitorum, which is going to be pretty much like the biggest chunk of them all. And then we're going to have another one here that we might be able to see a little bit more. And this one might actually push up this brachioradialis group. So this is going to give it its distinct shape, almost as if it wraps up around this ellipse right here. And then the center muscle here would be the one that attaches at the highest point, with the other ones seemingly attaching a little bit lower. But in reality, you know, this one here continues attached about the same spot here, but it's just hidden behind this mass. And then this one here in the back is just hidden behind the extensor digitorum. So it would look something like this. And then, you know, it's normal that there's a small hole right here where you can actually see the edge of the humerus. So yeah, you can just leave that there, you know. And then this muscle here actually starts right a little bit above that. So you'd be left with something like this. And then, you know, there's a couple of holes here, so there's nothing here. In this case, you know, you would have some more muscles that kind of go like this, but those are very, very small muscles that don't really grow. So for the most part, what's going to happen is just going to be like a big blur, right? So it's going to go towards the wrist, and then kind of just all the muscles are going to fade into tendons, and then all you'll really see are the tip of the bones for the ulna and the radius. And then the elbow, as you can see here. So this is the tip of the ulna, and then you'll actually see that kind of go and slide right in between those two ellipses that we've drawn. So the ellipse for the posterior group here for all the extensor muscles for the hand, for the fingers, and the one for the anterior group for all the flexor muscles on the palm of the hand. So that would be something like this. So this is how you draw those different muscles. And like I've said, most of the time, you know, you're not going to be able to see all those details. So it's going to be a lot more blurred than that. This is really for somebody that has zero body fat, and maybe somebody that doesn't even have skin. So yeah, for the most part, you know, it's going to be kind of like just a big blur towards as you get closer and closer towards the wrists. And now let's move on and actually draw the rest of the muscles on here. So similar to what we did for the other scalp, I'm going to adjust this right here because that's not quite accurate. And I am going to redraw the bones properly. With the biceps like this, I know that the edges of the humerus are going to be somewhere around here. So, you know, if I draw kind of like a big circle on top here, like an ellipse like this, it should be the same ellipse and the same angle, all right? So something like that. Yeah, so that's good. So that ellipse looks a lot better now. So that's the proper angle. And then we'll have the ulna that attached kind of in the back here, which we probably can't really see from that angle, but like biting here in the back. And then now I can draw kind of the different bones for this. So I have the ulna. I know that the ulna is going to land right down here. So that one's easy. And then I have the radius that's going to land, we're going to start right onto the outside here of this face, always on the outside, the humerus, and then twist to land right onto the inside of the hand here, closer to the thumb. Now the structure is a little bit more accurate. So it's not, it wasn't as simple as a plank like this. It wasn't quite like that. All right, so that would be a better representation of the bones right now. Kind of like a twisted plank of wood. All right, now I can start to draw those ellipses. So I know I'm gonna have an ellipse that starts kind of like towards the ulna or towards the other side here. Not the ulna, towards the other side of the humerus. So it's going to be kind of like behind here. So I'll have one ellipse that goes like this, again pointing towards the center of the wrist. So this ellipse, I'm not sure I'll be able to see, probably not. This is the one for the anterior group, right? So for all the flexor muscles, and those are going to be, well, hidden behind those bones right there. So if I erase that part that's hidden, we'll get maybe a peek at it on the inside here, towards the front of the arm. Now the other ellipse is going to start on the other side of the humerus. So they always start at the ends of the humerus right here. So on the inside here for the anterior group, and then on the outside here for the posterior group. Now I'm working on the posterior group. This one's going to, again, go like this, and this one going to have its tendon all connect onto the top of the hand here. So I'm going to make sure that I orient ellipse properly as such. And finally, the brachioradialis group, which is going to start right here. So at the top, the halfway point of the brachialis, and then go down and towards the side here, towards the radius. So not so much towards the center of the wrist, but towards more the radius, right? So long ellipse, a thinner ellipse. Okay, so here we are. So now it's a little bit cleaner. So all that's left now is to adjust kind of the where those all connect. So I'm going to start with the brachioradialis here. So it slides right in between the brachialis and the triceps, and then that's going to come out here. It's going to get a little bit thicker towards the joint, right? So where the joint is, the muscle gets a little bit thicker here, and then kind of back into a thinner and thinner and thinner muscle as it reaches the end of the radius. And then if we do the other ones now, so on the inside here, we're not going to be able to see much, so I can kind of forget that, because all this, this darker portion here is going to go on the inside here in between the two bones and then land onto the palm of the hand. So we're not going to be able to see any of that, but we can still see, where the bicep kind of slides right in between the anterior group and the brachioradialis group. And then on the outside here, the posterior compartment, on the other hand, is going to go and again fade onto the top of the hand. All of these tendons go into the fingers. So now for the posterior compartment, from this angle, I'm probably not going to be able to see all three different muscles, but we'll probably be able to see two of them. So we'll have kind of this one right here that essentially starts at the same spot, right? So this is the top of the ellipse. This one, like, it's a split that starts right at the top here, but we're only going to be able to see it at this point right here because the brachioradialis is kind of on top of it. And the only reason that we're not seeing three different ones is because the third one would be right behind this one on the other side of the arms. Now, the final thing, all that's left to do is kind of adjust the shape of these. So this one's going to fade a little bit more right here. Maybe have a little bit more mass there. And then we can indicate kind of like the split in between, right? So it starts in the back here and kind of wraps around and splits right there. And then kind of finish off the outside. And so, in reality, like I've said before, all of this here is going to be pretty much just a big blur. We're not going to be able to see much there. So we'll see kind of like where the bones land, right? So on the inside here, we'll see the bone. On the outside, on the other side here, we'll see the bone as well. But that's pretty much it. This will be how you draw the forearm from this particular angle. So now really quickly, we're going to do the same thing again with the rests. So we're going to do the same thing right here. So in this particular angle, things are not going to change too much, but from this angle, it's actually the opposite angle from this one. So we're going to see the inside of the arm a little bit more, a view that we haven't really seen yet. So we are going to start again by tracing the ellipses, starting from the two sides here of the cylinder right there. So the cylinder from this particular angle actually works quite well. So we'll have kind of like the bump for the ulna in the back here that we can't really see. That's going to land in a little bit more like that. And then we'll have the radius. So there's not going to be much of a twist going on here. So we're going to start with the ellipse that we're not going to see very much, if at all. This is going to be the one for the posterior group, so all the extensor muscles. And it's going to start right in the back here. And then we have the anterior group here for all the extensor muscles. We're going to start on the outside. And finally, the brachioradialis. Well, we know that the brachialis is right here, and that the halfway point is right about there. So we'll see it starts the ellipse right here, and it's going to go and ends, right about the halfway point on the arm, on the forearm. And we have this one right here, and it should connect with this other ellipse. You can start to clean this up. So that's a little bit better, a little bit cleaner. So actually, I can probably move this a little bit because the bicep wasn't ending right, in the center of the humerus properly. But yeah, as far as the ellipses, this is it. So it's, again, when you place the ellipses properly, when the bones are placed properly, it makes things super simple. It's already there. I don't really have much to do left. All that we're going to do is extend this, so all the flexor muscles are going to go into tendons towards the palm of the hand. So I just follow the line, follow the direction that the ellipse already gives me towards the center like this. This one right here, the brachioradialis, is going to go on the outside and kind of ends on the tip of the radius. Posterior group, probably not going to see much. It's in the back here, but we might see it a little bit, but probably not. And so there we go. So the rest of the arm we can just kind of fill in. But really all of this at this point is just tendons. Yeah, from this position here, pretty simple. So right where the ellipse here begins, actually, well, there's not going to be much left to do because all of these muscles here attach onto the humerus, which is kind of this shape here that's currently hidden, but that's underneath. So all attached on here, and then as a result, it gives us this nice bump here on the arm that is typical to the forearm. So everything is good on the inside here as well. And there we go, not much to do left, so it just works. So of course, in here is going to be a bunch of muscles like we've seen, but when they all merge together, and they're all really, really small, so I'm not going to be really able to tell them apart. Now, moving on to the final side here from the back. Things should be pretty simple. So we've seen a lot of different scenarios so far. We haven't seen one from the back just yet, but the same thing is going to apply. So we know that this is the sides here of the humerus. So what we are going to do is start with the sphere that we're not the sphere, the ellipse that we're not going to be able to see too much, the anterior group, the anterior compartment, because it's going to be mostly hidden. As we know, all those muscles end up in the palm of your hand, so they are going to be mostly hidden from this angle. The posterior group, this one right here, and now the last of them, the brachioradialis. So the halfway point of the humerus is around right here. So this is where the brachialis begins. So half of that's about right there. This is where the brachioradialis should begin. And this is a ellipse that's going to go like this behind the posterior group. So something like that. And it's going to go, like I said, behind this compartments right there. Much better. And well, to finish this off, I just want to quickly draw in the bones here. So now I'm ready to just add kind of like the last bit. So the tendons, and then from the outside here we can kind of see brachioradialis kind of poke out, and then the three different muscles here that we can clearly see from this position, from this angle, and we're done. So that would be it for the forearm. There we go. So here is the final result for the forearm. Now, again, I don't want to stress this again, this is a little bit scary when you look at all of this, and it's good to remember that most of this portion here is covered with skin, and you really don't get to see much. So there's going to be very just hints of all that. But it's really good to know where the muscles connect, where they start, where they end, on what bone they start, on what bone they attach. It really makes things a lot easier when it comes to accuracy, because you really don't have to guess anything. When you know how everything is constructed, well, it's just piecing back together the puzzle. So you have all the pieces. It's just a matter of putting them in the right order, in the right position according to one another. And just like any real puzzle towards the end, you know that you're done. You know that it works when the last piece just fits right in there perfectly. Now let's move on to another complicated part of the body, the hand.
When it comes to the anatomy, the hand is probably one of the most complex part of the body because it just is so packed with stuff. You can take a look at the arm like we've done before, or the different like the deltoids, or all those big groups of muscles like the pectoralis major in the front here. All those groups of muscles are really, really simple. They're big, they're visible because they have pretty simple functions. But when it comes to dexterity and being able to move the fingers in a bunch of different ways and doing a lot of different things with your fingers, it requires a lot of different things in there to be able to move all of these properly with the level of dexterity that we know we have. So when it comes to the anatomy of the hand, there's not going to be much muscle there. So that's not really what we're going to take a look at here. As you can see here, the muscles are mostly centered, mostly focused on the palm of the hand, and there's not going to be any muscle in the fingers. So those are going to be only the tendons. So they originate from a muscle, but everything that is going to be found on the fingers themselves is going to be just tendons, which is why you don't ever see someone with really, really like big hands or like muscular hands, more muscular fingers, I should say. So you can definitely grow these muscles, so the muscles of your thumb and then kind of like the hand. So the width of your hand can increase for sure, as with strength. But as far as the fingers themselves, they are never really going to change. Like I said, when it comes to the muscles, there's not much there. So let's take a look at the different bones, and especially if you've never seen a hand exposed like this without its skin. So there's going to be a lot of different bones here towards the center on the wrist, connecting the ulna and the radius to the hand. But we're not going to worry about those too much because again, they're not visible. But there's a couple ones that you should definitely be aware of. So the main bones of your fingers, the main bones of the hand. So those that are actually going to really influence the silhouette, the surface, and kind of how we draw the hand. So the main ones here are going to be these ones right here. So this is the metacarpal. Those are going to be the biggest bones in your hand, and they are mostly located in your palm. So they end right at the knuckles here. So, the tip of the metacarpals are going to be your knuckles. And now to the metacarpals attach what is called a phalanx. So you'll have 3 in each of your fingers. So you have this one right here, the biggest one, which forms pretty much half of the length of your finger. So the first joint, the distance to the first joint is it's actually a little bit more than half of your entire length of the finger, and this one's going to be called the proximal phalanx. And then you have this one, which is the middle phalanx, and the distal phalanx at the tip. And it's the same for all the different fingers except for the thumb here, which everybody's well aware that we have one less joint for the thumb, so you won't have the middle phalanx. You'll have instead just the distal phalanx and the proximal phalanx, and they'll attach the same way to this metacarpal. Now, before we move on to actually drawing the hand, there's one thing that's interesting with when it comes to the bones of the hand here, especially the fingers. And you can see here, whenever we look at a joint, the bone tends to flare out, right? So especially here, it's especially visible when you have the metacarpal here. You have this big ball here, and then you have a socket for it, which is going to be this phalanx right here. This phalanx is going to act as a socket, and as a result, it has to flare out to accommodate the ball of the metacarpal. So the result of that is basically at the joint, the bones are going to be a little bit wider, and they tend to narrow towards the center of the bone. So this means that, at your joints, the finger is going to be a little bit wider at the joint and a little bit narrower in in between the joints, basically. So if you're really, really skinny, the joints are going to be really prominent, and that's a feature of of skinny hands. You see the distinct difference between the thickness around the joints and in the center, in between. So there you go. Now let's move on to drawing the hand. So moving on in here in Photoshop. So when it comes to drawing the hand is, I wouldn't say that it's harder than drawing the face. It's definitely not, in my opinion, but it's very likely the second most challenging things to draw when it comes to anatomy. And for a simple reason, being that it's almost like an entire body of its own. So not, when you draw the entire figure, you're drawing the two legs, the torso, the head, and the two legs. And when you draw the hand, it's essentially the same thing. So you have as many different limbs, if you want to consider each finger a separate limb that can move, it can bend in a bunch of different ways. So in that aspect, it's just a very complicated, very complex part of the body. The whole point of this section here is going to be how to simplify it as much as we can so that we can draw it in multiple positions. So just like we've done thus far, but with the hand, it's going to be especially important to simplify things and to memorize a couple of proportions so that when comes the time to drawing the hand in a difficult position, because what we're going to see first is definitely not difficult, right? It's the flat hand, but it's important that we take a look at this before we can actually deform it and pose it in a bunch of different angles. This is what we are going to check out. Now, here are the different steps for coming up with the measurements of the hand. So there's a million ways, and there's probably as many ways as there are teachers when it comes to figuring out those different proportions. What we're going to start with is essentially two spheres. So the overall idea when it comes to drawing the hand is that I like to draw a mitten first, right? So it's something that's going to look like, so you have kind of like the body, right? Which is going to be the palm of your hand, and then you have all the fingers, which is going to be something like this, and then you have the thumb. So very similar to a mitten. And this is going to work for pretty much every scenarios, and also it makes sketching and figuring out kind of like the right position for the hand before you actually commit to drawing the details. It makes that possible. It makes that a lot simpler, so you don't have to waste too much time. And so here are the various steps. So first things first, we have to figure out the size of the hand. So the size of the hand, generally speaking, is, let's say you have a head right next to it, right? So we're going to draw a head. So let's say we have a head right here. The hand is going to go all the way up here. So it's not the entire head, so it's not as big as your head, but it's definitely pretty big. So basically from your chin to your hairline. So if you want to measure things properly, if you want to have a hand that works with the rest of your character, make sure that you keep those in mind, those proportions in mind. Now, with that said, what we have here are two different circles. So we're going to start with two different circles. The two different circles are going to give us the full length of the hand, starting from the wrist to the tip of the longest of the fingers, which is the middle finger. And from there, we'll be able to pretty much create everything else and come up with all the different measurements. So once we have that, once we have those two circles here, it can be, you don't have to have the hand behind. You can just start drawing two circles like this. And from there, well, you start placing those knuckles. So the knuckles, the size of the knuckle is going to be approximately, twice the gap in between those circles here, right? So if you split that circle in half, it's going to be about this distance right here. So keep that in mind when placing the four fingers. And when it comes to the thumb, well, the thumb is pretty similar. It's just a slightly bigger circle, and those should all kind of originate from this ellipse right here. And again, if we want to talk in terms of measurements, the ellipse here should be about 1/3 of this entire circle here. So 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And it should fit, of course, it should fit within that initial circle that we've drawn. And this is going to be that line right here for the ellipse is going to be where all those metacarpals are going to go attach onto. So if you trace the line for the metacarpals, straight down, and they all go attach onto that
ellipse right here. So it's not going to be, for example, it's not going to attach to the same points here, right? It's not going to be like this. It's not going to be straight down. You trace the line here and you'll have all those bones kind of connect at an equal distance. So equal distance, equal distance, equal distance, equal distance here onto all the smaller bones here forming the wrists. Now that we know kind of where to place those circles and how big they should be, this should be, the size of them is actually going to give us kind of the indication for the size of the knuckles, which is pretty important, and which also is going to give us the size of the width of the fingers. Those measurements, they're not random. The size of these circles is not random. It's kind of important that you get used to drawing them in the proper size. So again, for the most part, for most hands, unless your hand is like really, really stretched where the fingers are like, your pinky's kind of like this and your thumb is kind of like this, even then, those circles here for the knuckles are going to remain in the same position. So if your finger extends, the metacarpal might move a little bit, right? But it's not going to go suddenly all the way up here. It'll stay there in that particular angle, and what is going to move, what's going to change is the angle starting from this point here. So the rotation point is the knuckle. It's not at the base here. So all of this to say, again, that these are not going to change position. Those 4 circles here are not going to really change. The only one that's going to move around is the one for the thumb because it has a little bit more of a range of motion. But those here, if you consider half a sphere, half a circle in between, you should be fine. Moving on, what we're going to do is draw kind of like the body of the mitten. And for this, pretty simple. You just kind of wrap around all the circles here for all the fingers. And then for the thumb, it's kind of a concave line instead, but still the line should flow from the side here all the way to the top of that knuckle. And then from there, you kind of just go down and join into like a nice circle here and then back up to finish up the basic, the shape of your palm. From there, we are going to add kind of like the limitations for the mitten. So this is where you can start to play around, so let me drop the opacity for this a little bit. In this case, you could have a mitten this big, or you can have another one that's, if your fingers are like this instead. So this is where you kind of indicate the position of your hand, the position of your fingers. If they're all clumped together, well, maybe it would be something like this instead. It doesn't have to be perfect, and the length doesn't have to be perfect. All that you need to worry about is pretty much making sure the line is not longer than this one right here. So this limitation here at the top, the outline for the second circle that we've drawn at the beginning, this is going to be kind of the maximum length for the longest of the fingers. So just make sure that the pinky, for example, is not like this long, right? So if anything, you can make it as long as the middle finger, and we'll chop it off later, figure out kind of like the proper size for it. There we go. So this is going to be what we are working with in this case. And then from there, what we need to find out is kind of like that line right here. So what is going to be the limitation? How are we going to close off that mitten? And this is an important line because it's going to give us a curve that we need to follow for kind of like for the rest. So this curve right here is going to be important. And to make sure we don't mess it up, this is what I recommend. So once you have kind of like the limitation of your fingers, once you know where your fingers are going to go, at least you have like a decent idea. Like in this case, I know, it's not going to go past that. So this is kind of like the overall shape that I'm working with. What you do next is you trace well, you don't really have to do that, but this is kind of where I'm getting that next line. You trace a circle or an ellipse starting from the middle knuckle here. So make sure that this ellipse is really nice and kind of follows, wrap around. Use this one here, use this knuckle as the center for the ellipse. So if your fingers are, for example, if they're a little bit more spread out like this, well, you're still going to use the center here. So let's say the thumb is like this. You're still going to use the center knuckle to create that circle, but instead of being an ellipse, it might be a circle, right? So it might be a little bit more circular. If all your fingers are kind of clumped together like this, with your thumb like this, you still use this one right here, and instead the ellipse might be a little bit tighter, a little bit longer, but you're still using the middle knuckle as the point of rotation. And Now that we have this, we're able to trace this line here. So this curve is going to be pretty important. This is going to give us kind of the length of each of the fingers, and will allow us to figure out a lot of the other proportions for the rest of the fingers and the thumb as well. So now that we have this, we can kind of hide this portion here. And so now we have a pretty good mitten, and the next step's pretty easy, and we're pretty much done. So now it's only a matter of subdividing this mitten properly to figure out kind of like the length and the position of those joints onto the hand. So we'll have a line like this. So if you can see here, we're essentially splitting this shape in half, right? So we take the length of this line right here, cut it in half. We take the length of this side right here, cut it in half. And then we can do the same thing here. So we can take any line here going like this and cut that in half, and then you trace a nice line following all those points, a nice continuous curve. So we want to make sure that you don't go like this, or not like this, and not like this. You know, it has to be a nice curve that flows. And this is going to give you the indication or the location for the end of the first, or the proximal phalanges for all of your fingers. Not your thumb though. The thumb is going to be a little bit different, but we're not done yet. So we have one more line that we need to figure out, and this is going to be for the second joint of the fingers. And again, we're going to split the other portion in half again, which is going to give us this curve here. And for this curve, it's important that we continue it beyond kind of like beyond the mitten. Continue it and not break it again, you know, keep a nice flowing curve. And this is going to give us kind of like the length for the thumb. And then from there, we should have all the measurements that we need to be able to finish this off. So you can probably see here, there's a little bit of buffer, right? So between the tip of the distal phalanges and the outside of this mitten, which is normal. And when it comes to your fingers, to the tip of your fingers, you know, if you press on the tip of your fingers, you'll find it's a little bit, there's a little bit of padding there. So you're not touching the bone directly. So in reality, the bone ends at about the halfway point, and then you'll have kind of like your nail start right about here and then go all the way to the top and to the tip, not the top, the tip of your finger. So you'll have your nails kind of like this. And same thing with the thumb right here. And so this is normal to have a little bit of buffer here. So this is something that I haven't really mentioned, but when you do, you know, when you draw this circle here, draw it a little bit bigger, a little bit longer than the two circles that you had previously. And by default, you shouldn't have to think about that too much. You know, if you use the center knuckle here, well, by default, if you go all the way down here to the wrist to make sure that you within that circle that you grab the bottom portion of the mitten, by default, if you keep this in the center, this line here should be correct, and you should, by default, without having to think about it, essentially come up with a little bit of buffer for each fingers here if everything is centered properly. There we go. So now, well, we are left with just the simple task of kind of drawing the fingers on top of this stuff. So we can hide the skeleton right here, and so we know that this line here doesn't really indicate much. It just indicates kind of like the start of the nail for the thumb, if anything. And now we know the location of all the different joints, so it should be pretty straightforward from this point on. So we'll know that, you know, the fingers start here, that they're about as wide as this, and then we can place kind of like you can start with just simple lines to make sure that everything's centered. So maybe something like this, something like this, something like that. Now to draw the thumb and to make sure that it's kind of in a proper position, again, we can bring this up again, this ellipse right here. Make sure it's 1/3. And we know that the metacarpal for the thumb is going to attach here, right? So we're going to go from this point here, so the center, and attach onto the side here, kind of in a direct line. And so if you want to use this line here, it's a good guide to know kind of the range of your thumb, basically. So if you trace a line like this, it should be, this line here should be about as far this way that the thumb can go. Some people here have kind of like the distal phalanx a little bit more flexible, so it might, at this joint here, might curve a little bit more, but to make sure that the proximal phalanx is kind of correct, just trace a straight line here, or can curve it towards the other fingers, of course, if your thumb is bent, but you wouldn't have this, for example. That wouldn't be possible. So for this to happen, for this to work, you would need to take this entire joint here and kind of like rotate it down, and then you would be able to trace a line from here through the center of that knuckle and then outwards. So now that we know kind of where the line for the thumb should be, let's draw it. So we'll start from here and it'll go somewhere like this. So that's going to be the tip of the thumb. So from there, well, we can kind of drop the opacity for everything else. And again, you don't really have to do this every single time. This is just to figure out kind of the average proportion for the hand. The more you do this, the less you'll have to add all these indications. But it's a really, really good way after you've drawn the mitten to know kind of like how everything should be split, and it gives you really, really easy proportions to go off of. And so now we are ready to draw the fingers. So we know that they're going to start about this wide, and we can actually draw the other joints. So for the tip of the first, the proximal phalanx, this is going to be a little bit smaller than the knuckle, but still pretty big. So it's a big enough bone. So for the thumb here, right in the center, we have kind of like the full distance here. So that joint is going to go right in the center here. So we didn't have a guideline for that, but it's right in the center. So pretty straightforward. So yeah, about this size. And then those joints get smaller and smaller as you go towards the tip of the fingers, right? So the next joint here is going to be a little bit smaller, maybe like 2/3 of the previous one. And then the same thing here again for the tip of the finger. The tip of the finger really doesn't matter. You don't have to draw the joint there because there's no joint really. But yeah, we can use kind of like the last width of the last joint here to give us an indication of how wide the tip of the finger should be. So we just go like this and then kind of connect the dots, right? So touch the outside of each of those circles. Touch, 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 touch. Same thing here. And then we can start drawing the nails. So the nail is going to go at the halfway point here again, right? So from that joint here to the tip, I'm going to start right in the center. So go like this. It's a little bit narrower at the root, and then it kind of gets wider and wider as it gets towards the tip of the finger. So again, and then, so those fingers are all facing up. For the thumb, it's going to be a little bit different. The nail for the thumb is not going to go like this. It's actually going to be, so if we imagine that we have kind of like a cylinder for those fingers. So we have a cylinder like this for the thumb. So far, all the fingers have been kind of right down the center, right? So we have the nail right here. So very symmetrical. For the thumb, the symmetry or the top of the finger is going to be more tilted on the side here. So the nail will be more like this. It's as if it kind of rolled over. So for the thumb here, we can draw the finger as well. Goes the tip here, so something like that. And the nail, well, it's going to start again. If we consider that this line here is the center of the thumb, so we can draw it here. So this is going to be kind of like the root for the nail of the thumb on the side there. Now we would have kind of a proper hand. Next up, well, we can just trace over all of this and should give us a really nice finished hand in the correct proportions. All right, and so now if we hide this here, we can kind of finish off this hand. So of course this hand is seen kind of from the top, right? So this line here that we have for the knuckle is going to be important to give us the indication of where the palm is going to go. So we can actually kind of use that line to know where the webbing should start for the hand. So basically just take those lines here coming down from the finger and make a nice U at the bottom. You know, not too low, not too high, or like right on that line. And Now, if we hide this, so we can add with the bottom here, we can add kind of like the rest of the wrist, right? So we know that we have all those smaller bones here, and there is the ulna that's on the side here, it goes like this, and we have the radius that's a little bit bigger in this case, it goes like this. And so what we can do is kind of use that width for that, that ellipse here. This should indicate us how wide the wrist should be. And on the side here where the ulna is, it'll create kind of like a small bump here for the hand. And on the inside, we shouldn't see it too much. Yeah, so there we go. So this is how we create a hand. Now for the top view, we'll be able to see a little bit higher here. We'll be able to see a little bit of the webbing, which is going to give us the illusion that the fingers are longer from the top, even though they're not really. And we can also use those knuckles here as a base for the actual knuckles that we are about to draw. So there we go. So, we can clean this up a little bit, but basically this is how you construct a hand in proper proportion. So it might have seemed like there was a lot of different steps, but I'll do it again really, really quickly to show you that it's actually pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But before I do that, real quick, I am going to duplicate this over, and we'll do kind of the inside of the hand, which is pretty similar, but we're just going to get rid of the webbing here on the inside. So we're not going to be able to see that. For the inside here, we'll create that line again. So that's actually going to be there. And we'll have kind of like the padding here for each of the fingers. Remember the different measurements. So at the halfway point, here we'll have kind of like the first joint where the fingers bend. And it's going to be all in the same line. We'll have here for the thumb, and then a little bit higher here. Again, split in half, split in half, split in half. Should give us the other fold, because on the inside of the hand, we have a little bit more padding. So if you touch the top of your fingers, this is where the bone is going to be. But on the inside, on your palm, this is where all the padding is for the muscles of the hand, kind of the typical fold that everybody has. As simple as that. So like I've just said, I'm going to do the same thing again now, but much quicker now that we know all the different steps. So to figure out the size of a hand starting from scratch, so all you have to do is start with 2 circles. This is going to give us the full size of the hand. We can trace kind of like a sphere here at the bottom, occupying 1/3 of the full diameter. And this is going to be kind of like the size of our wrist, the width of our wrist. And we also know that now we can start drawing the knuckles. So we'll have a knuckle here for the pinky. And then from there, we can draw the outside or the body of that mitten, figure out kind of how the fingers are going to spread. And from there, using this circle here, we can start kind of like draw a ellipse using that as the center of rotation. So something like this. So it was somewhere along those lines, something like that. And as a result, again, this is going to be a little bit longer than the 2 spheres that we initially drew, but this is fine. The only reason why I draw 2 spheres at the beginning, if you're wondering, you might not have to do this one if you don't want to, but it's just before you start like measuring all the different things here, I like to have a good idea of kind of like the size of the hand, how much space it's going to occupy. So which is why I use those two circles initially. But now we can easily just get rid of that one. It's not going to be needed anymore. You can erase the tip here. So this is going to be kind of like the outside line. Now we split that in half. So I'm going to figure out this is a half point here, half point here, half point here. So I know I have a nice curve that I can draw, trace, and then same thing again in half for the rest of the fingers. Not the cleanest line, but it works. Now I can draw the fingers. So I know that my thumb is going to go like this. Here, this is going to be the tip of my thumb, goes like that. And then I have all the different fingers. And yeah, now we have the nails here starting at the halfway point. I now have a hand in correct proportions fingers in correct proportions, and it was pretty quick, like you've seen. So the more you do this, the more you can start to skip different stages, and at some point you'll probably be able to do kind of you draw kind of like the shape of the mitten first, right? Like this. Then you draw the fingers, where the fingers are going to go, thumb, and then you can just subdivide those. And the more you do it, the more accurate this quick result with skipping those steps, the more accurate this should be. There we go. So this is how we figure out the proper proportions for a hand. Now let's move on to something a little bit more challenging, which is going to be drawing the hand in different poses and in 3 dimensions. So right now it's been pretty flat, so more like 2D, more like 2 dimensions. Now let's add a third one in there and see what kind of volumes we're playing with here. So if we place the wrist or the forearm into this particular angle right here, right? So imagine this is the 2 different bones. So we'll have the ulna right here. You'll have, meaning that the pinky is going to be on this side, and then you have the radius here, and which means the thumb is going to be on that side. And now, well, this is going to where the attachment point is going to go. So we know that this ellipse, right? So the ellipse here is basically placed right there, which is why the tip of that shape, that volume is not straight. It's actually curved inwards a little bit, concave, just like it is right here. So same idea here. And then, well, to make that work, the palm itself is going to be something like this. Again, a fairly simple shape. If you want to think of something like this that exists in real life, you can probably think of like your mouse, your computer mouse. So it's very similar. So instead of being flat, again, it's not going to be a shape that's flat like this and then rounded at the tip. And it's rounded only so that it can kind of like fit right here, fit in that socket. So the receiving socket for the wrist. And if we take a look at that ellipse again, so that ellipse would be somewhere around here, right? And so it's this shape, but instead of being straight like this, being flat on a table, it's actually curved like this. So it's as if you're pushing up like this. And then you have kind of like this nice curve going like this. And this is very typical of the hand. So as you can see here, if you just look at the skeleton in like a relaxed pose, you really get this curve like this. It's not flat. It's definitely not flat. And even from the side here, we can see the thumb. Most of the time, it'll be kind of on a different plane, pointing in a different direction. So it's always a little bit lower. So if you have kind of like the mass of the hand right here, the thumb's kind of pointing down a different angle. Now the next step here would be to draw the thumb, or at least a simple representation for it. And this is going to be a little bit tricky because the thumb can move quite a bit. It has but it has a wide range of movement. So it can start in this position here, or it can be angled this way instead, or it can even go like this, right? And so it's going to be a little bit tricky to try to explain this, but the way I like to think of that is simplifying it with 2 different ellipses. So we're going to have one, the biggest of the ellipses here, which is going to originate on the side, this like chopped off mouse, computer mouse. So we'll have the first ellipse here. Basically, we're trying to grab this whole thing here and the joint at the same time. So this is going to be the ellipse that we'll try to play. So it has to be in those proportions. So think of those 2 things here as when drawing the size for the ellipse. And so the size is going to go. This ellipse is going to start here on the side. So we can imagine, this side right here is the same side here. So it's going to attach somewhere on here. So the origin, however, is not going to be, so it won't be able to attach here, of course. It's not going to be able to attach down here. It'll always originate from the same spot. So we know that we have kind of like the wrist, the ellipse for the wrist here, and that thumb and that ellipse here for the thumb, that original ellipse, is always going to be oriented towards that here. So towards the placement, or you can always consider that kind of like the center of the wrist. That ellipse is always going to be oriented the same way, always along that line. So if the thumb is, if you open your hand some more, like this, for example, well, the ellipse is going to follow that same line. So it's not going to be like this. It'll always be cut along its length, right? So it's like a symmetrical line. With that said, now that ellipse, to place it in 3 dimensions, it's not too hard. So it's a simple shape, and there's basically one thing that you need to know to be able to place this properly. So if we look at it from the side view, right? So from the top or the side, whatever, this is going to be the ellipse. It's going to be a nice ellipse, nice and round and easy to shade. So it would be something like this. But the more the ellipse is pointing at us. So right now it's just pointing on this side. It's pointing this way. But the more it points at us, the more it's coming at us like this finger is, the rounder and rounder it will appear. So if it's pointing at us a little bit, it might be like this instead. So as you can see here, it's not as long. It's going towards more of a round shape. And if it's pointing at us a lot, it might instead appear as a circle. And then you would have, if we add kind of the other section for the thumb here, which is going to be another ellipse, pretty simple, an ellipse that's about, seen from the side at least, it's about 2/3 of this one right here. So it'll be about this much. So seen from the side, it'll seem like they're just touching, but at an angle, if it's looking at us, if it's pointing towards us, then maybe it'll start to overlap in this case here. And when it's pointing directly at us, it might seem like the 2 ellipses are kind of on top of each other. And then you would have, the nail here for the thumb, right? So it'd be like this. So that would be a thumb that's pointing at us directly. And in this case, here the nail would be maybe like this. So it would be pointing at us a little bit, but not completely. And then in this other case, it would be just basically laying flat on a surface. So it wouldn't be deformed at all. But the more it's pointing at us, the more those ellipses turn into circles. So just something to keep in mind. So if I'm to draw these on here now, always make sure that the ellipse is oriented towards the center of the wrist here, right there. Straight line from here towards the center, through the center of that ellipse. If it helps, you can start with a straight line. So we start here at the base of the palm, draw a straight line, draw a straight line. So we'll have the first ellipse, maybe that would be the first one. You can have another one here. Make sure that's always pointing in the same direction, and another one down here. So I'll do one at a time. So we'll start with a more relaxed position. So this would be a very basic representation of the thumb. So it doesn't look like much right now, but we have some pretty good proportions already without really thinking about it much. I think the hardest part when it comes to drawing the thumb is figuring out how the nail is going to be oriented. So when the arm is kind of straight in front of you and your thumb is not bent, so there's no bend here. When it's straight, that nail is going to be facing you most of the time. So it'll be facing this direction. So what we can do now is kind of adjust the shape of this sphere in consequence. So as you can see here, when it's facing something, it's more like a bean, right? The thumb, more like a bean like this. And that bean, that curve for that bean, that concave part of that bean is always where the nail is going to be, and it's always where it's facing. So in this case, it's facing us. Well, that bean is going to be more like this here. So we'll have the concave part on this side. And in this case, well, the nail will be right there. So we wouldn't really be able to see it from this point of view, from this angle. Now, finally, to finish off this thumb and kind of attach it properly to the rest of the hand, well, what we're going to do is hint at the knuckle here, not the knuckle, hint at the head, the tip of the metacarpal. What we made sure to grab with that initial ellipse that we drew. So we're going to draw that here, and then we can figure out, so the tip here, this is where the joints are going to be, so we can go and join in with the rest of the hand. And this is going to give us kind of like a small curve here, so going from this joint to that one. So we'll have a slight curve inward, so a slight concave curve. And from there, this is also going to give us, if we start right about the center, and the center of that joint here, we can create a nice line here that flows with the side of the arm, the side of the hand here. So of course, it's not going to be as pronounced, but it should be something like this. And then this is going to give us and the indication of where that fold should be. And then we can start to kind of fade it like this. So just like that. And then the bottom here we'll want, you know, to get back kind of like that mass here for the muscle of the thumb. And well, we can also use that circle here for the joint. So we start from here, we continue that line, and kind of go all the way down and towards kind of the base here. So the center here of the wrist. So a nice circle that kind of touches at all of these on the outside here, wraps around here, and continue. So make sure that the circle, the ellipse or the circle is a nice continuous one. So that's not a circle. Make sure that's nice and round, just like this shape is. So now this is super messy. So let's clean this up a little bit. So what we can erase here is the top portion here. And we're going to use the bottom line here for that shape here, right? The palm. So this is going to be the correct line where it meets with the thumb. And this is going to go back up like this. This is how you attach a thumb properly. So a little bit complicated, granted, but we're going to do that again with a thumb in a different position. So in this next example here, in this next position, what we're going to do is have the thumb like facing down all the way here as if this person was making a fist. So we're going to start with the same idea. We start right here and we trace a line towards the outside here. So it's a line that has to connect, at some point with this line right here. So there we go. So now it's oriented properly. And then we'll draw the other ellipse. Maybe this one's not long enough, but close. Now the other ellipse, well, it's going to be pointing in a different direction. So we'll have the thumb. So if this is kind of like the top of the thumb, right? We'll have the other ellipse pointing in this way. So this is going to be the line for the symmetry of the second ellipse. A little bit lower. There we go. So now we can erase all of that and we can start to clean this up a little bit. So I know that at this point here, we're going to have a nice sharp angle because that's where the knuckle is. And then once again, we'll want to grab kind of like that circle here. And now I can start to close these lines. So I know that I'll have like a bump here and then back up. Keep the bottom line again because that's going to be useful. So this line right here, so we can keep that. That's still going to be accurate. So we know the top of the thumb is always a little bit concave, like it is here, like it is here. So slightly concave. And then it's round, so round, concave, concave, convex, concave, concave. Right, so same thing here. So convex, concave, concave. And well, this is pretty much it. So we now have, this would be kind of like the muscle part. So this part right there. And there we go. And then the nail, this is the top here. The nail would be somewhere like this. And well, we would have a thumb in a different position, but it'd still be placed properly. Okay, so now let's move on to the actual finger. So for the thumb, quick recap, it's 3 different spheres. So we have 3 different ellipses. We have the first one here that we need to figure out. It's going to be the one that grabs the joint here for the thumb and also touches at the first joint. And we have a smaller one, which is about 2/3 the size of the first one. And then we'll have another bigger one, a bigger chunk that if the joint is right here, what we need to do, this is going to be the last one that we do, and this is going to be the section that connects the thumb to the rest of the hand. And this one, well, to figure it out, we just have to draw a nice circle, making sure that we grab this and that we touch here at the base of the wrist. So it's going to be a circle that uses those 2 points. So something like this, right? You can see it works really well in this particular example as well. And so those are going to be the 3 different ellipses that we need to worry about when we draw the thumb. And then of course, making sure that we are able to place those in different angles so that we can bend the thumb in a bunch of different ways. Moving on to the other fingers now. So the other finger is going to be pretty straightforward in comparison to the thumb at least. So the first thing that we need to find out is going to be the shape of the ellipse for the first portion of the fingers. And this is going to be, at least for most fingers except the pinky, which is going to be a little bit smaller, but for most of the fingers, it's going to be the exact same one that we've used for the thumb, more or less. So what you'll want to do here is trace an ellipse here starting from any of those positions here. So if we have kind of like the hand like this, split up like that, well, we'll have first finger, second finger, third finger, and pinky. So place them at equal distance from one another. And then we can use that point here as the start for all of the different ellipses, or use each of them as the start for their own respective ellipses, I should say. So there we go. So we have the first one here. So first ellipse, second ellipse, third ellipse. And as you can see here, the ellipses seem like they're kind of like overlapping, right? Because we're looking at this in 3 dimensions. So the one that's closest to the camera here for the first finger is going to be, at least it'll appear like it's in front of the other fingers. Finish off the fingers with a slightly different shape. So it's not going to be quite an ellipse. It's going to be more like a bean. So very similar to what we did with the thumb. And this is what we'll use for the last two bones in each finger. And if we look at this really quickly, you know, like we've measured before, this first ellipse here should be the same as the second one, right? So it's the first knuckle here. It's not quite that, but when you look at the fingers without looking at the bones too much, so let's say the fingers begin here, it's right at the halfway point. So that first, where that first ellipse ends, it should be at the first knuckles, not the first knuckle, the first joint of the fingers. And then we can draw a bean connected to that. So right now, since this is at a slight angle, so the bean will appear like it's overlapping the tip here where it connects to it. If we were looking at it from the top, it will be just the first ellipse, second ellipse, same size, right? If we were looking at it from the side, we'd have the first ellipse and then the second ellipse, which would be more like a bean, be the same size though, but it'd be kind of like this, right? So like a bean shape. So this is what we're going to draw now. So first bean like this, make sure that the ellipse, you can start with an ellipse and then kind of sculpt it to make it into a bean. And then of course with the pinky, I want to make sure that's a little bit shorter. All right, so now that I have something that looks like an ellipse, I'm going to just start to sculpt that, you know, starting from the joint here. So we have the joint, the first joint, it's going to be like this, nice curve. So we want to make sure that starting from here, we have a nice bean shape instead, back below. And then this is where you kind of adjust the length of all those different fingers based on the proportions that we've seen so far. So the first finger here a little bit shorter, the middle finger a little bit longer. Now with these beans, what we can do is split them in half like this. So this is going to give us the indication for the last of the joints. And then you can split that in half again. So if we consider that this is kind of like a cylinder, right? The tip part is a cylinder. We can chop off the tip here. And half of that cylinder, this is where the nail is going to start from. So we'll have kind of like the nail here, go like this, wrap around. So now we have a little bit of cleaning up to do, but essentially it would be done. So this is how you do all the different fingers. Now, of course, if you have some fingers that are a little bit more bent, then you might want to change the shape of that bean, right? So if the finger is bent instead, you know, instead of being a bean like this, well, the bean will be bent, right? So we'll have the nail here where it was here before, but in a relaxed pose, it'll be more like a bean shape seen from the side. And then from there, what I recommend is that you draw the fingers as the tip of the fingers as long beans, and then bend them if you need to. But it's a lot easier to get the right proportions this way. And then, yeah, let's just clean this up. And now the fingers look a little bit too short, but that's normal because they're not properly connected to the hand. And all we'll need to do here is kind of continue the line. So instead of having go back in to follow the curve of the ellipse, we can erase that. And we can erase that big line, that big guide that we had. Actually, not too much because we know that this is where the knuckles are going to go. What we can do is just have the line continue and touch that line instead. And this is kind of how you draw a hand. So now it's all about adding details if you want to. It's all about kind of just cleaning this thing up. So now like the connection to this finger here, I can keep that edge here because that's kind of accurate. So this is going to be kind of like the indication for the fold. But then of course we'll erase all those sharp lines. Then we can add an indication for the knuckles. This is kind of how I approach drawing the hand in different positions. So whenever there is perspective involved, this makes things really easy to just play around with 2 different ellipses. So we're not worrying about all the different joints. It's just 2 ellipses, super simple. The other one that we kind of tweak to make it more like a bean, like this, like I've said. The result of that is a pretty accurate sketch. So it's not going to be a final image. Of course, this is still pretty messy, so there'll be a lot of cleaning up to do there, but it should give you a pretty accurate hand. So now that we know how to draw the hand and the fingers in perspective, let's look at how the hand actually attaches onto the wrist. So this might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but it's a particular feature of that attachment point that we need to take a look at. So seen from the side, because that's going to be a little bit more obvious, if we have the wrist like this, the hand is not going to attach at the same level here. So it's not going to be a straight line at the top. It's going to be a small dip. So it's almost as if there was like a step here. So that's something that you should always consider when you draw the wrist and the hand. There is always a step like this. And of course, it's not going to be like a sharp step like this. Instead, we'll blend it nicely, because that line here at the top of the hand is always a nice continuous line. But it's important to know that there's going to be a small dip. So if your hand is completely straight, right? If you're trying to stretch your arm as far out as possible with your hand, with your fingers pointing out as well, your hand's not going to be completely straight. Instead, it's going to be more like something like this. It will seem like it bends down, and then the fingers themselves are going to actually be parallel to that line, but it's going to be more like this instead. So you have kind of like that. So if we look at the different parallels here, so we'll have kind of like this line here, so straight line, and then the fingers might be straight as well, but there's always going to be a dip before that. So if you're trying to stretch your arm as far out as possible with your hands pointing like this, with your fingers pointing like this, you'll clearly see this change of plane here. So go down and then straight again. It's not going to be a continuous line. And there's a reason for that, and that has to do with the skeleton itself. So if you look at the bones here, well, what we can see is that we have kind of like this empty space here right after the bump for the top of the wrist, right? So this bump right here, and this bump right here. After that bump, after that highest point, there's kind of an empty space here. So the skin will go down and then kind of join at the top here for the knuckles. But this portion here is going to be slightly concave, and it's going to be a clear change of plan here, kind of like a break between the different planes. And so if we look at that from the top view, what this would look like is kind of like as if the hand's going into this shape here. And then you could add a little bit of shadow there, so something like that. And if we look at it from the front here, again, we'll have kind of like this stair, this change of level, and this is going to be represented here by, we'll have to adjust that line so that it flows nicely from the wrist onto the hand, but it's going to give us this little bump here that we'll see from pretty much every single angle, and that is going to be correct. So this is what we need to pay attention to. We need to make sure that we add that. Now, of course, if that hand is instead kind of just, bent like this, well, you won't see the dip as much, and going like this and down into the fingers, and then the line will break on the other hand at the bottom here, where the bottom of the wrist kind of meets with the mass of the muscle for the thumb. So you have a clear break here and a nice flowing line at the top. So that's usually how it goes. And yeah, there we go. So this is just kind of a small detail that we have to pay attention to when drawing the hand. So it's not a straight line, and it's important to really represent those bones here and how they end in the wrist and how they connect to the hand. So finally, we are going to take a look at another example using this technique here. So how to draw a different hand in a different angle using the same idea. So what we're going to start with again we'll start with the basic shape for the hand. So in this case, I'm going to go with something like this. And it's always good, you know, when you start, before you actually commit to building the hand, you know, to building it like this, always good, like I said before, to draw kind of just a mitten to get an idea of what your hand's going to look like. So just a quick sketch, right? So something like this. And it should give you a good idea. And again, make sure that you draw the wrist, because that's going to influence kind of like this bump right here. So I'm thinking maybe something like that, right? So this is a super rough version of the hand, but you can tell, you know, the fingers are going like this, going like this. Even though it's super simple, I kind of get a good idea of the position for this, you know. And then, so now that I have an idea of what I'm going to do, now let's actually build it. So we're going to start with the position for the hand. So I'll call this kind of like the mouse, the computer mouse part. So we'll have something like this. And then once you have that, you know, I always like to continue it like this. And then, so this is this portion here, again, this is this portion right there. So the bone's going to start here, but in between, you know, in between the hand itself and the wrist is kind of like an empty space here. So I'll get kind of like this small dip here, and then the arm straight down. So now that I have this, I can turn this into a 3-dimensional shape. So now that I've added a little bit of shading so that we can understand this volume better, let's go ahead and attach the thumb. So this is going to be kind of like the middle, the center here. I've added kind of like the transparency a little bit to this. And so starting from the center here, trace a straight line again, so outwards. So in this case, you know, this portion of the thumb is going to be coming towards us, and the thumb is going to then bend towards the inside. And so this ellipse, this initial ellipse, is going to be coming from this side towards us, and, you know, attaching onto this side here. So the line is going to go like something like this. And so the ellipse is going to be more like from this particular angle, more like a circle, because it's coming directly at us. And then we'll have the other ellipse for the tip of the thumb. And then from there, right about this point right here, kind of like behind, you know, behind this first ellipse that we drew, we remember that there's supposed to be this portion here. So the ellipse is essentially this right there, with this part of the metacarpal, which should be around this point here. So right behind this ellipse. So about right there. And then from this, what we can draw now is a circle kind of going from here and wrapping this up together. So a nice circle like this to indicate the mass of the muscle here. So now it's getting super messy, so we can start to clean up a little bit here. So those lines on the outside we're not going to need really. I can start to erase that. I can start to erase this portion here at the bottom, because we've already found out that this mass here, this circle, is going to be acting as like the muscle part for the thumb. And well, if I now connect all these, we'll have kind of like the thumb and then merging into this one here, the nail, just like that. All right, and so now I have kind of like this bump here, so we'll need to make that flow into the rest of the arm, into the rest of the hands rather. Now we're going to create kind of like the starting point for all the different fingers. So the ellipses are going to start from there, and then I can just go ahead and draw those ellipses. Again, the size of the ellipse, right? So I have the total length of my palm right there, so it's about half of that. And then finally, the last section. So similar sized ellipse that we are going to turn into, remember, into a bean. All right, so there we go. So now I have kind of good construction for my hand, and you can already tell that, you know, it actually flows quite well already. It didn't take me much time, and by using those two ellipses instead of, you know, all the other techniques that show kind of like cylinders, and it just makes things really, really long to construct. With spheres like this, if you're not spheres, with ellipses like this, if you're not happy, you can easily change, you can easily tweak, adjust the different positions, and it just works really well. So now from this point on, well, all that we need to do really is adjust the bean shape. And then once we have kind of like a good enough shape for the beans, split the beans in half. And again, it's almost as if it was a cylinder. So, and we always have to pay attention to the angles. So if I were to draw a circle around that cylinder, it would be like this. It wouldn't be like this, right? So that would mean that the finger is kind of going in that direction. And it would mean that the nail would be kind of like this, which is not the case. So instead, it's oriented in the complete opposite direction. It's coming towards us, and this is what those circles here, or those curves, indicate. And then finally, when we're in a good spot like we are right now, well, we can start to actually clean this thing up. So what we're going to do is just create a new layer, and we're going to draw on top of this, just clean our lines and trying to basically connect everything, the way it should be. All right, so I'm going to stop here, but once you're satisfied with your result, and you can just, just do line art, you don't have to go this far. One good way to check your work and to make sure that the flow of your movements, that the gesture of your hand is actually good, is to check with this line here, these curves, that we've drawn before. So if you can trace a nice curve, a nice continuous curve between all the joints, all the major joints of the fingers, and actually pretty much all the joints of the fingers, doesn't quite apply as much with the thumb, but for these at least, if you can trace a nice continuous line that essentially touches every single one of those joints, should be in a good spot as far as the gesture goes. In my case, it's not super natural. I could have definitely improved that. And this is something, once you're at a stage where it's only a bunch of ellipses, you can definitely do that exercise here to make sure that all your ellipses are kind of like lined up nicely. And so this is a good step. This is a good way to check yourself. You don't know exactly to tell if your hand's correct or not. If you don't have anybody to let you know, you can definitely use this technique here. And if you're not good at tracing a line like this, a continuous line, you can definitely go ahead and use the pen tool. So, first line, second line, kind of try to match it so that it connects with all the different joints. If it doesn't, no big deal. You can always adjust the different length. Make sure, maybe if this was too high, well, you can just drop it, make it lower so that it all lands on the same line as it should. This is going to be it for the chapter on hands. And now we're going to move on to the lower part of the body into the next chapter. I'll see you then.